We're finishing up a series, In Search of Meaning. I hope that it has been helpful for you. It's actually one of the series that, as I've studied it each week, it's really helped me kind of shift my perspective on things. For example, pleasure, understanding that there's a difference between pleasure and meaning, understanding how to even find meaning in life. And today, it's about finding a real love that genuinely, deeply satisfies. Because the reality is this, we live in a world where there's a crisis of meaning. And one of the main reasons for that is there's more pleasure accessible to our fingertips than ever before. If you think about how many cable channels there are, right? Like, I'm sure most of us have no idea how many cable channels that we have at the fingertips of the remote. YouTube, social media, Google. There's just so many ways in which at any moment we can escape. But what that's shown us, and especially in this generation, is that empty pleasure leads to an empty life, at least the feeling of an empty life. And the question today is, with all these temptations available at our fingertips, what does it mean to find meaning? And really a love that sustains. So open up your Bibles to John 4. As many of you know, we don't put the passage up on screen because we do want you to learn to open up the Bible on your own. And we believe it's very, very important, integral to your faith. John 4, 1 to 45. It's about a story of a Samaritan woman who in this moment sees Jesus and finds him. And in this, as she has searched for meaning in love, she finds a truer meaning. Verse 1 of John chapter 4, verse 1. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. And we'll pause there. He sets up the story, John does, to help us realize what's important in life. And he sets up the story helping us understand Jesus' journey, his perspective. He's traveling about 30 to 40 miles to Sychar. So he's tired, he's weary. It's the 6th hour, which is noon, in the summer. And so if you grew up in a place that had summers and you had chores to do outside, you never did it in the middle of the summer at noon. I had to mow the lawn. And so I never did it in the middle of a summer day at noon. It was always never in the morning, because as a kid, you never wake up early. It was always late at night. Jesus, he's there at noon, because he's been traveling for a long time. So for him to take a break, it would be at noon. But the question is, this woman, why would she carry jugs of water, liters, like gallons of water, 20, 30 gallons of water? Why would she do this in the middle of the day? Our first point is this, the need for meaning. We all have a need, an innate longing of our hearts, a need for meaning. So tell your neighbor, you have a need for meaning. You need meaning. You need meaning. You need it. And Jesus knows exactly why she is here. Because she screwed up her life. Because of this longing that she has for meaning, she screwed it up, and she's now the town laughingstock. People, when they see her, they gossip about her. Oh, isn't she the woman that has all these husbands? Continue on, verse 7. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." what Jesus is doing is he's, with his x-ray vision that he always does, he knows what's in her heart. So now she's using her longings to pull out deeper longings that she has. So she's there to get water. So she uses that touch point to say, you want water, but you don't want just this water. You want something that satisfies your soul. What he's saying is just as our bodies, our physical bodies, just as our physical bodies, we long for physical water, what he's going to help her see is you're not just a physical being. You're a spiritual being. And because you are a spiritual being, you have a spiritual thirst that nothing can satisfy but a spiritual satisfaction. And that's what he's getting at. That our bodies thirst, but not only that, your soul thirst, your heart thirst. This is why you have longings, you have hopes. No one had to teach you to hope, right? I never had to teach my children, my sons, how to hope. They see something, they long for it, and they hope. And when that hope is diminished or demolished by his twin brother, they wail and they cry. And that's the story of our lives, right? We hope, we get excited. Oh, this boy, oh, this girl, oh, this job, it doesn't work out, right? This agony. Because we have a need for meaning. All of us, as rational as you think you are, as much of a thinker as you may feel like you are in that Myers-Briggs personality test, you're still driven by a heart. You long for hope, you long for joy, you long for love, you long for a purpose. So we all have a need for meaning. So what is this meaning and what makes it substantial? Because that's the question. If we have no choice but to long for these things, to long for meaning, we should ask, what is it? What is it that we're actually longing for? What's that substance? The substance of meaning. What makes meaning meaningful? You see, as he talks about living water, he's referencing the Old Testament. He's referencing all these prophets that talked about how we need a living satisfaction, a living water that truly satisfies. So Jeremiah 2:13 says this, and this is God's indictment to his people. For my people have committed two evils. For they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. That word living water is literally living, like the spring. It's a spring of water. So if you imagine a spring or a place where water flows, it seems like it's flowing out of nowhere. That's the picture. That's a picture of God. And then the alternative are these cisterns. It's like you do all this work to go to the well, pour all this water in, and as you bring it back home, there's this little crack, dripping little by little. And by the time you get home, it's empty. All you have is the filth, the muddy filth of water that lays in there. And God is saying, do you want to drink that, or do you want to drink living water? That's the dichotomy. The difference is one does not run dry. This living water. That's what he's talking about. What makes meaning meaningful is this. One, it truly satisfies. It truly satisfies the soul. But it lasts. That's what makes meaning meaningful. So if you think about what makes your life meaningful, you have to find something that truly satisfies and that it lasts. When you think about that, there isn't much. Because for example, there's a lot of pleasures that literally the next morning, it's almost as if it has created a deeper chasm in your heart. You feel even emptier because of all the pleasures and all the meaning that you had the night before. And so it's a sense that there's some pleasures that don't truly satisfy. If anything, it creates this other desire in your heart. And that's what he's talking about. You have your heart that's like a cistern. It holds no water. Nothing truly satisfies. So he's saying you have to know your heart. If you truly can understand how your heart works, you'll be a lot wiser. Because it's a picture of why would you have a cup of water and pour it in when you know that it continues to leak? It'd be silly. You go to someone's home and they have a cracked glass and they give that to you, and as you're eating dinner, it slowly leaks out. Right? That's the picture that God is saying. This is your heart. You have to understand that's how your heart works. That's all the substance that you desire. It's lacking. So he continues on in verse 11. The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water?" So she's still interested in this living water. She doesn't fully understand that it's a spiritual reference. She's thinking of something physical. And she says, "Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again." And that's the key. One, you stopped thirsting. It truly satisfies. The other, you need more and more and more. It's a picture of salt water. It seems to satisfy for a moment, but what does it do? It corrodes the body, and you thirst even in greater ways. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. We have these never-ending attempts to satisfy ourselves. What he wants us to see is that the substance that we long for is it has to satisfy and it has to last. Another vision of water talked about is in Ezekiel. And in this, it's this picture of the temple. And from the temple, there's this trickle of water that flows out. Trip, right? Trip, trip. And they take this measurement. There's about 1,000 cubits, it says. So they take this measurement as this trickle somehow continues to well up so that when they take a measurement about 1,000 cubits later, it's ankle deep. And they take another measurement 1,000 cubits later, and it goes knee deep. Another 1,000 cubits. It goes waist deep. And he looks out, and this trickle of water that starts from the temple somehow transforms into a living water that continues to grow, continues to satisfy, and it's a picture of it going out into the city, giving life to everything that's dead. And that's what Jesus is talking about. When you have this water, it satisfies more. And you want more of it, not in an addictive way, not in a way where you feel like it's this need, but you want it because it's good and it gives you life. That's the picture of the substance that you want. Some pictures of that in our world is maybe family. If you come from a good family, it's a sense of it gives you something good. But even with family, one of the best gifts that God gives to us, if we put all our pressure on that, it starts to disappoint us. If it starts to disappoint us, we start to destroy that family. So many of us, we have that relationship with maybe our dad or our parents or our mom, where they were pretty good, but because maybe we had too high of expectations from them. Basically, we wanted them to be perfect. They disappointed us. And maybe in hindsight today, you realize they were pretty good parents. That's the picture. That's a picture of what it means, that we have this longing for meaning, and it has to be substantial. And you have to understand that's what your heart is like. You have to find that thing that truly satisfies. And so what's the obstacle for that? The obstacle of meaning. What takes away that meaning from our lives? We continue on. Verse 15. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." So she's still not fully understanding, but she's agreed. So now the story is changing. She says, whatever this is, I want some of it. So Jesus, in his ninja-like skills, uses that. It's okay, you want water? Okay, now, if you really want water, let me help you get the water. Verse 16. Seems like it's out of left field. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband, come here." The woman answered, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The story is she's there for physical water. Now she wants living water. Jesus then says, okay, you want living water? Let's talk about your husbands. What's the connection? What's the connection? Jesus is helping her realize, in order to truly get meaning, you have to see what's counterfeit. You have to see what's counterfeit to see what is true. If you don't see what's counterfeit, you'll continue to chase after what is counterfeit. And so for her, she wants the water, and then she says, and she brings attention to her husbands. And if you know of that society, for someone to have had 5 husbands, it says a lot more about her than the husbands. It says a lot about her in terms of she's using one man after another man after another man because she wants something from these men that these men cannot provide. That's what it's a picture of. And so when she says, I want water, and then he asks her about her relationships and her husbands, what he is doing is what kids today call it a boss move. This is a boss move. This is a moment where everything pivots, and she's starting to realize what is going on. How does she know all of this? You see, our hearts, you and I, our hearts, we have this relentless, insatiable hunger for meaning. And it'll continue. It'll be like a leech. It'll continue to look after something, find something, until it finds something that it feels like for a moment you have meaning. And it'll suck the life out of it. That's what we do. That's what we are. We are hearts on a stick. And if we understand that is our heart, you have to understand then what your greatest temptation is, the greatest obstacle. The greatest obstacle is finding meaning. The greatest obstacle to finding meaning is settling for empty pleasure. And so, for example, and we do this in many ways, not just spiritual, but even very, very good things like family, right? I've heard of several stories of people that I know where for one night of pleasure, they throw away their marriage or they throw away their relationship. And you've, by now, I'm sure, have known friends to do that. When you talk to them, what do they always say? I don't know what I was thinking. It was so foolish. And what do they say? It was so empty. It was so meaningless. See, that's a great temptation. If you want to live for something meaningful, your greatest temptation will be to settling for an empty pleasure. That's just the way in which it works. But if you find something that's worthwhile, that's meaningful, you give all of yourself to it. And so that's a great obstacle, not just for family, but on a spiritual level as well. Many of you know who God is, and you know you want your soul to be satisfied in God. But what do we always do? We pour that water into that cistern, and we see it drip, we see it fade, but we do that again. For that moment of hit, that moment that your soul is satisfied, and you continue to do that. You see, that's the great obstacle. Can you fight for something meaningful for your life? And for those who have, they've withstood many temptations, Christian and non. It's just a way of life. In Greek mythology, there's a king of Sicily called Erysiphon. And he was cursed by the goddess Limos, who is a goddess of starvation. And so this goddess Limos enters into Erysiphon. And what enters is this insatiable, unrelenting hunger. And all he wants to do is eat. You may know people with this goddess in them. This unrelenting, insatiable, just hungry. They eat and they get hungrier. That's what Erysiphon did. He would eat and he would say the fire of the hunger would grow and he would want to eat even more. So much so that he couldn't control his desires that he sells his daughter for money and food. And the story ends of Erysiphon eating himself to death. And what I think Jesus is showing here is if you really want a living water, a living meaning, a meaning that's substantial, you have to know it's counterfeit. If you don't know it's counterfeit, what will happen is you'll continue to leech on, attach to yourself to all these other things, and in the process you'll destroy that, because those things can't truly provide. And at the end of the day, what you will do is, because you've now lived for empty things, you've crushed your own soul. And your soul is left there empty, longing, hungry. You've eaten yourself to death. Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie, Morrie Schwartz was a sociology professor, best-selling New York Times seller, but he was diagnosed with ALS. And he starts to meet with some of his students weekly, sharing just life lessons. And as he shares these life lessons, he also shares about his new perspective on life as death is now imminent. And this is what he says to Mitch about this idea of meaning. Part of the problem, Mitch, is that everyone is in such a hurry, Morrie said. People haven't found meaning in their lives, so they're running all the time looking for it. They think the next car, the next house, the next job. Then they find those things are empty too, and they keep on running. When I overlook the subway at traffic hour, you ever do that in Korea? You just overlook a subway, or you just take a moment and you just look around, and everybody is just so busy getting to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. It's called that rat race, right? That's what Mitch is saying on a grander level. He's saying what he has learned is that if you can take a step back, this is what we always do. We hope for that graduation in high school to get to that better college. After we graduate college, we look for that better job. After that job, we look for maybe a relationship. And after a few relationships, we look for that one relationship that will give us what we want. And in that, we're now looking for a career. And then now we're looking for children. We continue on in this rat race without ever wondering, what's it all about? And what it looks like is this cycle that never ends. You see, the obstacle is for you to realize all that does happen. And to be able to take a step back and ask yourself, what really matters? Right? Isn't that what the wise people who have lived always teach about? Take a step back. Don't let the urgent things dictate your life, but live for what matters. So the path to meaning. How do we then truly find a meaning that truly satisfies? He now gets to the core of what this woman longs for. The woman said to him in verse 19, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him." Hear those words, right? The hour is coming and is now, present tense. Even for us now, present tense. It's already here, this hour. It's already here for us. When true worshipers, that's the question, right? Are you a true worshiper? When true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." And then he drops the mic. Right? That's literally what happens. This woman comes for physical water. She learns about spiritual living water. She says to Jesus, "Yes, I want it." Then Jesus interrupts and says, "If you want this, you have to know it's counterfeit. All these men that you've filled your life with, they will never satisfy. You can find Prince Charming. He will not satisfy. He won't be charming enough," right? And so it's in this, the conversation shifts. Now, what truly satisfies? What Jesus is saying, what truly satisfies? The way in which your heart finds meaning is through worship. I would have never guessed it. If someone asked me, how do you find meaning in life? I would have never said worship. And that's when you realize Jesus is really insightful here. This living water, this ache, this longing of her soul, the way in which it is satisfied, it is not taking more. Do you see that? It is not, I want more of this. I want my reputation. I want a better man. I want a better home. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, you want this? You want the living water? You want the thing that truly satisfies, that truly gives your heart what it truly desires? Worship. Worship. What is worship? Worship, I would define it something along the lines of you find something worthy and you praise it. I think that's what it is. You find something worthy and you praise it. So we worship all the time. And I know the way in which we think of worship is that 15 minutes of church, right? The music that we have. And so sometimes you think, oh, the church I went to today, oh, had awesome worship. So you may ask, oh, why did it have awesome worship? Oh, because they had strobe lights at this church, and they had smoke coming from the outside with purple lights. It was awesome. That's not worship, right? That's the spectacular. That's the lights, the festivities. That's not worship, right? If that's what it takes for you to worship, I would ask, does that compare to the glory of God? Right? We worship because we have seen something worth worshiping. Right? You go to a sporting event, and everyone erupts in worship at one point. Not because the ref says, on a count of 3, we're all going to shout loudly. No, because at a certain point, when someone kicks that ball or shoots that shot, and it goes in, what's everyone doing? They're literally praising that moment. They're worshiping. My anniversary is coming up in a couple of months. A couple of months. Next month. And if I was to, on that anniversary day, buy her a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and I say, honey, Sharon, babe, love you, here you go. And she's like, oh, why'd you do this? What if I said, I'm your husband, father of our 3 kids. It's my job. If I don't do it, you might get angry at me. Is that loving? Is that affectionate? Is that worship? No. Worship would be this. Bring home the bouquet of flowers. Honey, babe, love you. Here you go. And she's like, oh, why'd you do that? And I say, because you're the best. Love you. Right? All these years married. Some of it was hard. But love you. You're worth it. Would do it all over again. What would she say? Hopefully she would say, oh, I love you too, right? That's worship. You worship because you found something worth worshiping. So getting back to this story, she comes for water. She needs living water, a spiritual satisfaction. Jesus says, now with that, you have to figure out what's counterfeit. All these men, they won't satisfy. So the question for you is, what are all the things in your life that does not satisfy? How do you find it? Through worship. Not by conjuring up emotion, not by saying, I'm going to be disciplined in worshiping. That's not worship. It is saying, okay, now I need to find something that's beautiful. I need to find something that's fully worth all of my worship. I need to find something that is so meaningful, it will consume all of me. That is what Jesus is talking about. That's the only way for this woman who is probably in some sort of bad, right, cycle of life, man after man after man. That will be the only way for her to leave her pattern of life. Even on a practical level, she's probably very financially dependent on these men. The only way in which this woman would be able to leave that pattern is when she finds someone or something worthwhile. And that's all of our stories. That's how we make the greatest of sacrifices. Because we have found something worth worshiping. You see, the key to finding meaning is finding something worthy of worship. because that means that you found something that will consume all of you. And so in verse 28, what do we see with this woman? She leaves the jar. It's key. She labored. She walked to the well. She probably filled up the water, the cistern. And she leaves it. Why? Because she saw something better. She got distracted. That's worship. What he's getting at is you have to find something that is so all-consuming, so meaningful, that it consumes all of you. When you find that, worship it. But as you do that, you know what's also saying, as you worship it now, that's how you find enjoyment in it. Right? It's like the picture of in that game that you're watching. And they shoot that shot or they kick that ball and it goes in. And you're genuinely excited. If someone told you, okay, when they win, or if they win, don't celebrate. Just stand there. It will be painful. It really would be. Because your expression of it completes the joy. You need to worship to enjoy it. Do you see how that works? C.S. Lewis says it this way. But the most obvious fact about praise, whether God or anything, strangely escaped me. I thought of it in terms of compliment, approval, or the giving of honor. I never noticed that all enjoyment spontaneously, that's the key word, all enjoyment spontaneously overflows into praise. That's what he's saying. You see it and you want it and then you can't help but to praise it. The world rings with praise. Lovers praise their mistresses, readers their favorite poet, walkers praising the countryside, players praising their favorite game. I had not noticed either that just as men spontaneously praise whatever they value, so they spontaneously urge us to join them in praising it. Isn't she lovely? Wasn't it glorious? Don't you think that magnificent? Right? That's what we do all the time. And he continues on explaining what's happening. I think we delight to praise what we enjoy because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. Their delight is incomplete till it is expressed. As you see this woman, now she has found something more meaningful, more beautiful, and so she leaves the cistern and goes. But now what do you see her doing in verse 29? Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him. This woman who was filled with shame, who would go to the well at noon so that she would not be ridiculed, is now going into the traffic, going into the crowds, going into the city, regardless of her shame, because she has found something more beautiful, and now she's living for it. Now there's some meaning in her life. She's not scared of the voices, of the opinions of others, because she's found meaning. Do you see how that works? The most courageous people don't simply stir up courage. They're courageous because they found something worth being courageous for. Do you see that? Those who love the best, I believe, aren't simply those who are quote-unquote noble or good guys or girls, but they found something or someone that's worth loving. And that's what Jesus is saying. If you want to live a meaningful life, it has to satisfy, it has to last. It has to be all-consuming. That is how you live a meaningful life. And so where do we find this? Or who do we find this in? I've already referenced it. The person of meaning. In verses 39 to 42, the Samaritans, they come and they hear about his testimony. They hear his teaching, and it's from there they, at that point, also believe. This woman, who is so empty, is now so full of meaning, so full of love, even courage, that she even sacrifices going into the city to tell people about who this Jesus is. All these other people come, and now they learn. And it's in this group that they find meaning in Jesus. If you're a good reader, one of the things that you would ask is, how is it that Jesus is able to give her meaning? Because if you know God, you know that He is holy. You know that He can't just talk and interact with people who are sinners, because He is a holy God. What happens here also is that He sees her, and He's the only one that doesn't judge her. You see that? The whole town has judged her, but He's the only one that doesn't judge her. How is He able not to judge her? Is he affirming her lifestyle? No, by no means, no way. What's happening here? He knows He can do this because all of her sin, all of her shame, all the ways in which she has tried to find meaning outside of God, He'll take on the cross. You see, on the cross, if you know the story of the cross, He goes on the cross to take upon all of our sin, to receive the fire, the wrath of God. And then if you know the story of Jesus, He says something. And one of the things that He says is, I thirst. I thirst. Why? Was it just physical? I'm sure He was thirsty, carrying a cross, being crucified, one of the worst ways to die. I'm sure He was thirsty. But we know Jesus. There's always a deeper meaning. I believe what's happening is shortly after that He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? What's He saying? For the first time in history, there's a separation between God the Father, God the Son. When Jesus says, I thirst, He is saying what we have all said at some point in life. We're thirsty. We want meaning. We hunger for this. We hope for this, but it's failed us. What Jesus is doing is He's, at this point, taking upon the heat of the wrath of God, and He's thirsting so that today we wouldn't have to thirst. That's what the gospel is. He's taking upon all that is meaningless in our lives, all the sin in our lives. He's taking upon Himself on the cross. And in that moment, there's a divide between Him, God the Father, and Him. And He, at that point, is longing, thirsty, for the first time ever. Why? So that you and I, we would never have to thirst. That today, right here, right now, you can worship in spirit and in truth. You can go home. This is the gift. You can go home and your hearts can be full as you read Scripture, as you worship God. You can go into work tomorrow and not be dependent, a slave of the opinions of your boss or your coworkers, because you found something more meaningful. Do you see how that works? That is what God has done. He is the person of meaning. You see, what this says is you don't come to church because you're a good person. You don't come to church out of duty. You don't love Jesus out of duty. You're a good person. What it's saying is you worship because you found the one who is worthy of it. That's why you come. That's why you sacrifice. Because you want something more meaningful than the temporary pleasures that are so fleeting. This is why John Piper, talking about the Westminster Confession, says the chief end of man is to glorify God by enjoying Him forever. It originally says the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. He's saying you glorify God not simply by doing the right thing. You glorify God by enjoying Him. Your enjoyment of Him is what fills your soul with meaning, and it's what gives your life purpose. Augustine says this, our hearts are restless until we find God. I believe all the people who are searching for meaning will truly never be satisfied until they find God. And I believe one of the ways that will happen is when your life starts to picture that, like this woman. You start to change because you found that thing that is more meaningful. Isaiah 55 says this. I'll read a couple of verses. He says, "Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy and buy wine and milk, without money, without price." It's a picture of you don't go to God, you don't get your thirst satisfied by all your righteous acts, but you come empty. It's a gift of God. It's an invitation. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? That's his question. Why do you keep on living your life, filling those cisterns with things that do not satisfy? Verse 3, "Incline your ear and come to me. Hear that your soul may live." God invites you, not to the right life. It's the good life. It's the life where it may be challenging at times, but your soul, in those moments, you're satisfied. You're genuinely, deeply satisfied. And what it does is it gives you life. And through it, it gives others life. Let's pray.